like tense how I was before with this. Of where, I
Another chance at seeing you.
So let's start going through the individual little pieces of math so then we can start to put these together. Slides.
So that's
Alright, so the first piece of math you'll probably have to calculate is going to be the buyer's loan amount. That's usually going to be given to you as a loan-to-value ratio. Everybody remember a loan-to-value ratio? Remember, loan-to-value ratio is just the percent of the total value of the property that you are borrowing, right? So it's basically the loan amount divided by the sales price of the property. For your purposes, you're just simply going to take the sales price of the property and multiply by that loan-to-value percentage, right? So, you know, for example, here it says you had a $250,000 purchase with an 80% loan-to-value loan. That would be a $200,000 loan amount. And where would that go as far as your columns go? Which column would it go in? That's a buyer credit. That's exactly right. Okay? Interim interest. Interim interest. Remember we said there were two types of interest. There's accrued interest and interim interest. Accrued is interest that's built up since your last payment, right? What is interim interest? Future interest. And specifically for what period of time do you think when we have a closing statement? From what day to what day?
Day after.
Not day after. Day of closing till when? Till the end of the month. So day of closing till the end of the month. Say that one more time. Day of closing until the end of the month. Make sure you count the day of closing. So, for example, if we close today, today's March 11th, right? So the interim interest would be interest on the loan from what day to what day?
March 11th.
March 11th through March 30th, which is how many days?
12. 11. Yeah.
March
12.
11th
I'm sorry.
through March 30th. How many days is it? That is 20 days.
Yeah.
Right. 20 days. Don't do it as 19. You'll be wrong. And they will have that as an answer choice on the exam, because that is one of the most common mistakes to make. Remember to count the day of closing. And interim interest, who's going to pay for it?
Buyer.
The buyer. That's going to be a buyer debit. So, example we have here. It says Jason's obtaining a 30-year fixed rate, 4.5% mortgage loan for $185,000 closing on May 22nd. So the interim interest is going to be from when to when? May 22nd through May 30th, right? And so how many days is that? 9 days. That is 9 days of interim interest. So we take our annual interest is $8,325, and the way we came up with that is simply the loan amount times the annual interest rate, right? And then we divide that by what? 360, because we want to break it down from an annual rate to a daily rate. And then we multiply times the number of days. So we got 2313 per day times 9 days, 208.17. And again, whose column is that going to go in? Buyer debit. That's a buyer debit. Okay? As far as origination fees and discount points, again, excuse me, these are usually some percentage of the loan amount. Some percentage of the loan amount. Notice I said percentage of what? Loan amount, not sales price. Percentage of loan amount, not sales price. One of the most common mistakes for closing statement problems is forgetting to switch between the sales price and the loan amount when you're doing the loan expenses. And then when you do the commissions, back to the what? To the sales price. Remember, these things are a percentage of something. They're either a percentage of sales price or a percentage of the loan amount. When you're talking about things like origination fees and discount points, it's a percentage of the loan amount, not a percentage of the sales price. Everybody good on that? Okay. So, for example, here it just says he's purchasing a $400,000 home with a 90% loan-to-value loan at 7% interest and buying 3 discount points at closing. Well, discount points, how much do they cost? 1% of the loan amount, right? So the first thing I need to know is the loan amount. Loan amount is $360,000 times 3% for the discount points gives us $10,800. And again, who's going to pay that? The buyer. That's a buyer debit. All right? Excise taxes, always a seller debit. Always going to take your purchase price and divide by what? 500, and it's always a whole dollar. So if you have change, what are you going to do with it? Round it up. Round it up. Good. Good. As far as escrows go, when they tell you to escrow things like property taxes or escrow your homeowner's insurance, here's what they're talking about. Most people, when they make their monthly house payment, are not only paying the principal and interest on their house, what are they also paying? Taxes and insurance. They're paying 1/12 of their annual tax bill and 1/12 of their annual homeowner's insurance. And that money is going into an escrow account. Who's holding the escrow account? The lender is. For what purpose? What's the lender going to do? They're going to pay it when it's due. So they're going to pay the property taxes when they come due. They're going to pay the homeowner's insurance when that premium comes due. Does that make sense for everybody? So, when you set up a closing statement, very often you have to jumpstart those escrow accounts. You have to put money into the escrow account. Because think of it this way. If it's already March and I'm closing today and I'm escrowing, so that therefore who's going to pay my property tax bill at the end of the year? The lender's going to, right? They got to have the money for the full amount of the property taxes in there when we close at the end of the year. Does that make sense for you guys? If I start making payments, if I close right now, when am I going to make payment? When's my first payment going to be? Not taxes, my first house payment.
Oh, May 1st?
May 1st.
May 1st. I'm not going to make a house payment until May 1st if I close today. So think of it this way. May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. At most, I'm going to pay into my escrow account how many times between now and the end of the year? 8 times. Do you think it's reasonable that the lender would ask me to put 4 months worth of property taxes in my escrow account on the day of closing? Because they need there to be 12 of those payments in there when that tax bill is due in December. Does that make sense? And here's the thing, you're not really paying it anyway. It's going to show up as a buyer debit, but think about it. Where are you probably getting that money that's going to be used for that purpose anyway?
From the lender's clients.
Not the lender. From the seller.
Oh.
Because remember, the seller's got to pay their fair share of the property taxes, and who are we going to credit them to? To the buyer. So in most cases, you may see a big charge debit for jump-starting your escrow accounts, but it's just money you got from the seller 3 minutes before on another line. Because they paid their fair share, right? So they credit the buyer for the buyer's fair share, and then the buyer has to take that money and put it right into their escrow account. That's the way, now you don't need to understand that's the way it's flowing, but I think it helps to make sense of it, why they're asking you to escrow these things, why they're asking you to set up these escrow accounts. Well, escrow account's always going to be a 12th, so you take an annual charge and you divide by what? 12 to break it down into a monthly charge, and then multiply by whatever number of months they tell you to do. Okay? In this case, it says Scotty's purchasing a home with annual property taxes of $65.40, and her lender's requiring her to place 7 months of real property taxes in escrow. So $65.40 divided by 12 is $545 a month. And how many months did it say they wanted escrow? 7. So you just multiply by 7 months, and that's going to be a charge to the buyer, a debit buyer. Everybody okay with the escrows? We already talked about the property taxes, prorating the property taxes. This is where you're going to write those 2 statements, because you're splitting that expense between the buyer and the seller. So that's where you're going to write your 2 statements out. So here's an example. It says closes on July 18th, and annual property taxes of $43.80 have not been paid. So I'm going to erase this, and we're going to write the statements up here, show you exactly what I'm talking about. So closing is when? July 18th. So the seller owes January 1 through when?
July 18th.
July 18th. And that means the buyer owes July 19th through December 30th, right? Everybody with me on that? What do we know about taxes in July? They've not what? They've not been paid. They've not been paid because they haven't even been what? Billed. Remember, you've got to know that taxation timetable. They've not even been billed, so they haven't been paid. So who is going to pay them outside of closing? The buyer. The buyer. And what we want to do on the closing statement is what? The opposite. We always do the opposite on the closing statement because we're trying to fix or balance out what's happening outside of closing. Does that make sense? So if the buyer's going to pay them outside of closing, who do we want to charge here at closing? Seller. So we're going to circle the seller's statement. So who are we charging? Seller. So therefore, who are we crediting? The buyer. And the amount that we're charging and crediting is going to be how much the taxes are from January 1 through July 18th. Does that make sense? So before I even start with the daily amount, I'm going to figure out the number of days. January, February, March, April, May, June. I got 6 full months, right? So that's 30 times 6 is 180 days, plus how many days in July? Plus 18 days, so what is that, 198 days? So we owe for 198 days. Everybody okay with that? And then we simply take the 4380 and break it down to a daily amount, which is $12.17 per day. And when you multiply 1217 times 198 days, you end up with 2409.66. And we already said how it was going on the closing statement. So that amount is going in 2 columns, right? Which 2 columns are they? Debit, seller, and credit, buyer. Same amount, 2 different columns, both the same. We okay with that? Do the opposite of what happens outside of closing. Okay? Here's another one with this statement, but this is with rent. Now, our statement needs to change a little bit here. Is rent prorated between the buyer and the seller? Yes, it is. Does the seller owe rent? Does the buyer owe rent, or are they owed rent? They're owed, right? Okay. So in this case, it says the property's rent for $900 monthly and closes on September 9th. So when we do rent, I'm just going to change my statements a little bit. Seller is owed for what date to what date?
January 1.
Not January 1, because rent's paid how often? Monthly. So from September 1 through September when? 9th, because that's our closing day. And buyer is owed rent from September what? 10th through September 30th, right? Everybody okay with that? Now, what happened outside of closing? Who got the money? The seller did, right? Because rent was paid when? On the 1st. So what do we want to do at closing? We want to do the opposite. If the seller already got their money, who is owed money now? The buyer. So buyer is owed September 10th through September 30th. So who are we crediting? The buyer, and therefore who are we debiting? The seller. And what period of time are we figuring out? September the 10th through the 30th, which is how many days? 21 days. 21 days. Alright? And so we simply take the monthly rent, divide it by 30, that's $30 a day, times 21 days would be $630, and that would be debited from the seller and credited to the buyer.
Debit and credit for the rent.
Why?
Because it doesn't seem the same as
It's
the
not.
operation.
It's not the same as taxes.
Okay.
Taxes is a bill they owe. This is money coming to them, right? They don't owe rent. They're owed rent.
So it's opposite.
Read the statement. Does it say buyer owes, or does it say buyer is owed? How do you owe somebody money? you credit them the money, right? That's what you gotta do. That's why when it's rent, you change the statement. When it's property taxes or homeowners association dues or something like that, where it's a bill, you write they owe, seller owes, buyer owes. With rent, you write they are owed. Okay? All right? So, you'll have to look at this. I know you can't see it up here, but you've got the slide there in front of you. Let's work our way through one here. Now, first thing I need to do is set up my 4 columns, correct? I tell you what, I'm going to do it like this. That way I can keep all the math, and it's too small for you to see it up here anyway. So. Just do one of the slides here. All right. Okay, it says Tom puts on over $250,000. So, let me get into the screen here. What was the first thing we need to do when we see that we're doing a buyer cash at closing? What was the first thing we need to do? Set up our columns, right? Yeah. We need the 4 columns. We gotta have the columns. We can't get going without the columns, so let's go ahead and do that. And we need 4 of them. We got buyer debit, buyer credit, seller debit, seller credit. Okay? 4 columns. Just like that. As sloppy as you want it to be. Okay? So now we're going to start reading. We are never going to skip over anything. We're going to deal with a number and then move on from it, one by one. Tom is purchasing a home for $250,000. Stop. Do we have to deal with that number?
Yes.
Yes. Where's that $250,000 going to go, that purchase price? Buyer debit, right? And seller what? Buyer debit and seller credit, right? Purchase price. No math involved. Just knowing where to put it. Be closing on May 18th. Well, we don't need May 18th in our chart, but it's going to be important later on for things like our property tax prorations and interim interest and all that good stuff, right? Okay. So it's a date. You know, I might just like jot it down up at May 18th as a reminder. Okay. At the time of contract, Tom paid a $500 due diligence fee. So what do we do with that $500 due diligence fee? We're going to credit the buyer, right? So $500, and I'll just put DD. I would suggest you start labeling these things so that if you need to go back and check yourself, you can. $2,500 earnest money deposit. Well, wait a minute. Did I finish with the DD?
No.
What else do I need to do with it? Seller debit. I've got to take that back from the seller. Remember, credit it to the buyer and debit it from the seller. What about the earnest money deposit, that $2,500 earnest money deposit?
Buyer credit.
Buyer credit. What about the seller side?
Nothing.
Nothing. $2,500 earnest money deposit on the buyer's side. Buyer credit. He's obtaining a 30-year fixed rate, 80% loan-to-value loan. Stop right there. That 80% loan-to-value loan, is that going to be useful?
Yes.
Yes, because that's going to help me calculate what? My loan amount, right? So I'm going to take the sales price of $250,000 and I'm going to do what with it? Multiply it by 80%. What do we come up with for our loan amount? $200,000 loan. All right? And where is that going in my chart?
Buyer credit.
Buyer credit for $200,000. Okay? Right so far? That loan is at 5% annual interest. Okay? I'm going to just jot that down here. 5% as a note for myself. Because I'm probably going to have to do what with that interest rate? Calculate interim interest, right? Most likely that's what I'm going to need that for, is interim interest. Okay? So, for the property, and the lender's charging a 1% origination fee. 1% of what number? The loan amount, right? 1% of the loan amount. What's 1% of $200,000? How much? $2,000. $2,000. And that's going to be a buyer what? Debit. Okay. So the origination is $2,000 and the buyer debit column. And 2 discount points. So how much is 2 discount points going to cost? $4,000, because each one's going to cost $2,000, right? And we got 2 of them, so we've got $4,000 in discount points. And that's a buyer what? Debit. Good. The ad valorem property taxes are estimated at $31.90 and will be paid later in the year by the buyer. All right, so here we go with my 2 statements. Seller owes from when to when? January 1 through May 18th. Buyer owes
May 19th through
December 30th.
May 19th through December 30th. And what does it tell us about them? They're $31.90 and will be paid later in the year by the buyer. So if they're paid later in the year by the buyer, we need to do the opposite at closing. So which one are we doing? We're doing the seller's number. Okay? So that means we're prorating from January 1 through May 18. Now here's what I recommend. Before you even do any math, go put an asterisk in the correct columns. So you don't have to think after you've done the math about where to put it, and you end up putting it in the wrong place, right? You've already told yourself what columns it goes in. Seller owes, so who are we debiting? The seller, which means who are we crediting? The buyer. So I'm just going to come over here. Seller debit, right there. Buyer what? Credit. So I know before I even do the math, that's where they're going to go. Does that make sense for you guys? Again, take as much thinking out of it as possible. So let's figure out, the taxes are how much per year? $31.90. All right. So we got $31.90 divided by 360, right? We want to break it down to daily.
$8.86.
$8.86? $8.86 per day, right? Times. Now we need to figure out how many days. Well, I've got January, February, March, April. So that's 4 full months, right? So that's 120 days plus the 18 in May. So 138 days total, right? So 886 times 138 days. What do we come up with for our property tax proration?
1,222.
Yeah,
1222.68. Okay, $1,222 and some change. And listen, if you're off by change, don't worry about it. I mean, the final answer in these things, they're always going to want it rounded to like the nearest $10, nearest $100. You don't have to worry about rounding throwing you off. All right. So if you're anywhere around 1222, you're fine. Okay. All right. So we got 1222.68 cents. And we already know where it's going because we already marked it, right? Make sure you put it in both columns. Taxes. Is everybody following so far? Listen, if you're just looking and copying, you need to stop me and ask, right? I do not want you sitting here just mimicking what I'm doing. I want you to know why you're putting it in these columns. Because if you don't know, this is the opportunity to ask, right? Does everybody understand why it goes in these 2 columns? Because if you don't understand it now, you will be hopelessly not get it on your own. I can promise you that. Okay? Are we okay with these 2 columns and why it goes there?
Because the seller has to pay it to the buyer.
Because the seller owes it to the buyer, right? Because the buyer's going to pay the whole bill later in the year. Good? All right. So let's continue on. it says the seller has agreed to pay a 6% listing commission on the transaction. So stop right there. 6% of what number?
Sales price.
Sales price, right? Make sure you go back to the sales price of $250,000 times 6%. What is that? 15,000.
15,000.
Isn't it amazing how fast I can calculate 6% of something?
Yeah.
I don't know why. I don't know why that is. So what column is that going to go in? Seller debit
Yeah.
for $15,000. Good. All right. And we'll also have to pay excise taxes at the standard rate. Well, what's the standard rate for excise taxes? Purchase price, $250,000 divided by what? 500. So what do we end up with? $500?
Yeah.
We got $500 in excise taxes, and that's going to be a